Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Samir, welcome to 10,000 Miles. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Vic. It's good to see you again.
It is good to see you. For those who are tuning in, Samir Hinduja is a new acquaintance of mine, but somebody I became very interested in. And I think the course of this next hour plus here, you're going to have some people pretty interested in what you're doing as well, Samir. I met Samir through an old colleague from, 20 years ago, Dave Iwasaki. Dave, little shout out to you. Thank you for the introduction. He reached out and said, hey, been checking out some of your episodes. Pretty cool. And I got a real smart guy doing a lot of really cool work I think you'd like to meet. And so we connected, hooked up, had a brief chat. I won't get to the punchline here, but Samir is working on some really cool stuff. And we're going to get to that. But before we do that, Samir, why don't you introduce yourself to the 10,000 Miles audience?
Sure. By way of introduction, Dr. Samir Hinduja. I'm co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center. I'm a professor of criminology at Florida Atlantic University, and I'm faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. And what I do is I spend my time thinking about issues at the intersection of youth and technology, not just as some sort of exercise in theory, but really to identify practical solutions in terms of prevention and response to some of the problems that we're seeing arise, but also trying to figure out how we can build healthy communities online and how we can really help develop youth well-being and mental health in all the positive directions.
Well, if that's not an amazing intro, I don't know what is. And I'll tell you what, for those listening, you already know just from that introduction why I think this topic is super important. Samir, I have often thought, not professionally like you do, and I'm interested in your insights here, and we're going to get to it, but I've often thought about what are these platforms, tools, technologies doing to humans, and most importantly, what are they doing to the younger generations who have phones at 5 and 6 years old now? You know, but before we get to that, because there's a lot to unpack there, take us back a little bit on the Samir journey. How does one get to where you got to? Where did your interests start? Where were you born? Where did you come from? And how did you get to where you are? Pretty impressive credentials and doing really, really important work. But how'd you get here?
Sure, Vic. So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. And to be honest, I'm a huge fan of sports. You and I have talked about sports. And so I follow a lot of Missouri teams just because that's how I was raised. But when I was younger, we moved to Orlando, Florida because of my dad's work. And I grew up a Florida boy, and I was very introverted, very shy. Didn't feel like I attained much popularity in school. And so I tended to focus on what seemed to work for me. And that was getting good grades, being in gifted classes and honors classes, being involved in various sorts of activities that could help me level up both personally and professionally. And let's be honest, I would much rather have been in the center of attention, you know, from girls and from guys, but it just wasn't happening. I was pretty much a loner, although I did have a few really close friends that I'm still friends with to this day. So all along the way, I felt like I needed to become something that was contributing to society in some capacity. And I thought that maybe I would become an optician or an ophthalmologist because I wore contact lenses from a young age. And then I decided that's not going to really work for me because I'm not really interested in medical school. Then I thought because of my love for sports, I'd get into sports broadcasting. But because I was introverted, I didn't really know how that was going to come to be. And all along the while, I grew up watching a lot of shows that, you know, you're familiar with, your audience is familiar with, such as, you know, CSI. And I remember one that I loved, which aired on Friday nights at 10 p.m. on NBC. It was called Homicide: Life on the Streets. And it was based in Baltimore, and it just inspired me so much as it related to these detectives making a meaningful difference in their communities, and also obtaining such a sense of satisfaction, of course, from you know, making sure that we abide by justice and we strive for noble causes, but also understanding that life is super complex, and anything we can do to help another person, it goes a long way, and you don't know about the ripple effects. So then I thought to myself, why don't you become a law enforcement officer? You know, that'd be the first step, and then maybe a homicide detective and maybe a federal agent. And so along that journey, I studied criminal justice. But at the same time, a lot of cyber crimes were starting to evolve and grow in prominence. And I thought to myself, in criminal justice and criminology, there's a number of fields like domestic violence and homicide and, sexual assault, etc. But not a lot of people have yet glommed onto cybercrime to really understand it, to really figure out prevention strategies and response strategies. And I thought,
Yeah.
that could be my lane. And so I went to Michigan State, had an amazing experience for my master's and my PhD up there. Go Spartans. And as I was working on my degree, I was able to customize it in that I took classes not just in criminology and criminal justice, but also in computer science and the sociology of technology and society. And so there was just a lot coming together really beautifully, dovetailing to help me develop the foundation that I needed in order to eventually become an expert in my field. And at the same time, I thought to myself, yeah, I'm going to study identity theft and network security breaches. But the reality is that youth were embracing, and perhaps even the earliest adopters and drivers of the growth in technology, especially connected technology. And so then there started to be risks. Then there started to be harms. There was emotional consequences. There were psychological consequences. And there was suicides, which you and I both know is still top of mind for so many individuals today.
Tough.
When we're thinking about families, when we're thinking about nonprofits, when we're thinking about platforms, and when we're thinking about governments. Such a major issue. And so then I started to study more and more of this interpersonal harm that was occurring online between young people, between teenagers, and that just exploded. So over the years, from that point, I've studied cyberbullying, which we know is a significant problem amongst young people, but also sexual harassment online, general forms of harassment online, threats, sexting, sextortion, dating violence online, which is pretty similar to offline dating violence, which we're familiar with, but it's got its nuances and unique characteristics, digital self-harm. There's just a number of topics which have exploded. And before I turn it back over to you, I simply want to say that, this technology moves at a breakneck pace. And so we're dealing with now metaverse harms. We're dealing with generative AI harms. And there's always going to be something new down the pike. But one of the takeaways I have for you and really for your audience is that we cannot sort of get overwhelmed and lose our mind with what is next. Instead, I think if we concentrate on what it takes to be a good human being, to raise a good human being in intentional ways, in very specific, measurable, and meaningful ways, that's how we make a difference.
Samir, I often try to break things down into the most simple and digestible forms. And it's funny, I have so many questions, and you saw me whip out a pen and an old school pad because I want to make sure I come back to some topics. When you think about trying to solve for all these things, and someone can get really overwhelmed thinking about which one do I solve first? Where do I make the most difference? How do I impact the most people? And I have a friend who he and I talk about solving the woes of the world constantly and what needs to happen. And often, you can become frustrated in just the size of the way things run. I always use the analogy, hey, I worked for a company once that was a few hundred people, and we were very nimble, and we got a lot done. When we made a change, it was very easy to impact the 200 people positively. Or if we made a change and it was bad, it was very easy to impact 200 people very negatively. I then worked at a very large banking institution that at the time was 265,000 employees. It's grown pretty exponentially since I've been there, and trying to impact 265,000 employees was very, very difficult compared to what it was like when we were 200 people. And if you escalate and elevate that to countries, societies, making massive change in such, with a few people and making it in such a broad sense with a program or something is very difficult. So the simplest form I broke down and I said, how about everybody just helps one person? And if you got some bandwidth, help two, right? And if you got a little bit more bandwidth, pick up another one or two. Do the best you can, but at the very least, find your person. Find that person that needs a hand, that needs a help, whether it be practicing for the next job interview, a few bucks, a shoulder, something. Find that one person. So what I'm hearing in your message here is, I mean, you're on this much more data-driven, research-based quest because, we put out these technologies without really knowing what's going on. I'm going to put a pause there. I just wanted to get out so I didn't forget it. But I want to go back to your upbringing a little bit. First of all, when you were telling me your story about, hey, I didn't really make it with the ladies or whatever, I'm looking at a handsome guy on the line here, right? And in the video, and I'm like, you're like that guy that was in, what was the name of that sitcom? He was called McDreamy. He was in his 40s because when he was a kid, he was skinny. Girls didn't like him. What's that?
Is that Grey's Anatomy?
It was Grey's Anatomy, yeah. And so that guy, when he was a young actor, he couldn't get arrested with the women. I mean, it was horrible. And the next thing you know, he's sexiest man alive. Your day's coming, Samir. It's.
I appreciate that, Nick.
Yeah, your day's coming. You're a handsome guy. But what was it like in your family? Did you come from a studious family? I mean, was education a high focus? Did you pick it up? Was it forced or nurtured? How did that come about?
I'm sure you have friends who are Asian Indian, and you understand that there's a huge priority given to accomplishments, especially academic accomplishments. And so
Yeah.
I would say that, yes, it was a priority. And I do think that, we derive much of our identity from that. Whether or not that's fully healthy or not is debatable. Probably not fully healthy, but I would say that yes. However, with that said, I would also say that my parents were very gracious and encouraging along the way. Sitting down to help me if I didn't understand certain things, and being very, very supportive if I struggled, in this discipline or that discipline. But overall, it was a good experience. But I was driven in part because of my parents and because I was looking for identity, and I derived identity out of accomplishment and achievement. I focused on studies, and it did end up mattering. And by the way, when I'm trying to mentor young people and they're looking to find their way and they're not really sure where they're going to attain the validation that they're so desperately striving for, I say, look, what can you control? You can control how hard you work, and you have to understand that we're moving deeper and deeper into this knowledge economy. And so if you can specialize in some area simply because you've put in 10,000 hours and you've become an expert, I promise you that, everyone will be knocking on your door and giving you opportunities, and then you'll meet all the right people, platonic, romantic. Things have a much higher likelihood of working out for you.
I'm going to come back to the knowledge economy because that's going to be a topic unto itself. You talked about the stereotypes, Indian, East, Asian. I have a friend in town. He was born in Taiwan. Great guy, really smart. A guy's guy. You can talk to him about sports. He happens to be a surgeon. You can talk to him about medicine, talk to him about politics, could talk to him about music. He's a giant music fan. And, he's very Americanized. He came here when he was like 3, but his family very traditional and whatnot. And his son was taking up musical instruments in school, and he started with guitar, and he's playing guitar. And I think and I play guitar, as you can see from my background. He's like, hey, can you come check out Michael's guitar and his amp and help us get a sound? Sure. About 8 months later, I'm like, hey, how's Michael doing with the guitar? And he says, you're not even going to believe this. I said, what's that? He goes, he dropped the guitar. I said, he did? Why? He goes, he took up violin. He goes, my whole life, I'm running from the stereotypes, and my son takes up violin. He goes, of course I'm going to support it. He goes, but could you imagine? He goes, I'm into Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin, and my son's playing the violin. He goes, how much more stereotypical? They're going to think it's my fault, or at least my parents' fault. We chuckled about it. He's actually since dropped all musical instruments and become a doctor himself. But
Amazing.
Just a great life, but thought that was funny. So you've got this family, great upbringing, lots of nurturing. That's a big benefit too, by the way. And I'm sure they were building this emotional intelligence in you as time was going on, about resiliency, and you go out working hard, doing your best, but being able to take the falls and the shots too, and bouncing back. So do you remember a time in your upbringing where maybe you didn't do so well on a test, or something happened? Maybe let's stop at the college years where you had to lean on friends, family, whatever, to sort of fight back and how that was formed?
I think that I've realized in life that you can't let it knock you down. And I don't want to sound too trite and rattle off various sorts of hackneyed phrases. I simply want to say that I have learned and internalized it on the visceral level that you have to keep trying no matter what. And so whether it's I failed a comprehensive exam when I was getting my doctorate, or, I remember a season in my life when I was single. Now I'm married and have a couple of kids, and things are pretty great. But I remember a season in my life. It was a year and a half, and I was so desperate to meet someone, and I just reached out over time, face to face, online, et cetera, to over 20 women, and just trying to build a connection, just trying to see if there was anything there. And it just reeked of so much human effort and probably a little bit of desperation. And I shouldn't have done that.
Okay.
But it did keep me engaged, and it did keep me from giving up. And I feel like we have to do that, even if it stretches us in ways that are super uncomfortable.
The uncomfort is the sign of learning.
Absolutely.
I tell my son.
You think about Edison, you think about all these individuals who fail so many times with their startup until finally hitting it big. And so hopefully you can draw inspiration from that. I don't want to be a quitter.
Yeah. I want to come back to something you said about the knowledge economy. Do you mind?
Please.
Then we're going to get into your work a little bit here.
Sounds good.
So I recently, I think it's a few weeks ago now, I watched the launch of Grok 3, the X AI platform. And it was kind of neat because it was Elon and I think it was 3 or 4 of his key engineers there, and they were all giddy and geeking out and whatnot. And I just loved it. I watched the entire thing. But Elon said something that just floored me. And they said, yeah, pretty soon we're going to contain, all the information that's everywhere available on the internet, right? And Elon jumped in and said, no, we're going to have all human knowledge. That's vastly different than what's on the internet. That's non-publicly available research papers, over time. I don't think this is a tonight or tomorrow thing. So when we head out into a world, I don't know if it's a year, 2, 5, or 10 years, where knowledge is $20 a month, what do you think the differentiator is going to be?
Specialization.
Okay.
Yeah. Being able to demonstrate that this is my lane and I can dominate in this lane simply because I have the experience, I have the expertise, which of course stems from all of the days and nights and weekends and holidays involving work. And it doesn't mean that you don't take breaks, and it doesn't mean that you don't enjoy life, but you have to demonstrate you have to develop a love for learning. And so thinking what you're saying reminds me of my college students, because they always ask me, what should I pursue as I'm getting older? And, they often say, I've got this passion, but I don't know if I can actually make any money from it. And how did you fall in love with your work? And I tell them that I fell in love with my work because I put in all of these hours in these days and months and years. And when you become good at something, in your case, guitar and podcasting and all of your other skill sets, it's only because you've put in the hours. You don't typically start with some sort of passionate interest, and that really is what drives you towards expertise. It's the time that you put in. And this is not a new idea. We think about Cal Newport and others who have, sort of explained this, but it's something that very strongly resonates with me.
Yeah, it's time and discipline.
Yes.
Discipline is, motivation's nothing without discipline. People say, I'm motivated to do it. Hey, that's great. Are you disciplined enough to put the work in? Because people are searching for inspiration and motivation, and those things don't come every morning when you wake up. Discipline is what gets you through that. And you're right. When you become really, really great at something and you've got that, like it's in the soles of your shoes, they're just cushy and you feel, and if topically you can engage a conversation on something and bring something to it of value, whether it be a conversation, a work, a paper, an action. For athletes, it's physical, doing something pretty spectacular. That comes from the discipline. Pretty interesting.
And your point about discipline, I think, ties in very neatly to what we're going to talk about during the rest of this presentation, in terms of what parents and guardians need to be cultivating. It ties into self-control. It ties into a lot of these, social and emotional skills, which unfortunately we neglect targeting intentionally. And we're hoping that they just naturally happen amongst the youthful population, which, as you and I know, are struggling with all these very complex issues. But I just wanted to have that quick interjection because it will come back around as we move forward today.
It's a great segue, and it's a perfect segue. Start us off in a, you mentioned so many things from, the cyberbullying and various platforms and things like. Where do we start? Where does this conversation start with your interest in what you're working on?
I think what we need to do is first level set as it relates to the impact of social media on youth.
Let's do it.
As you can imagine, a lot of politicians and government officials and advocacy groups keep pointing to social media as the primary predictor or cause of mental health issues, well-being issues, all of these struggles that we're seeing. And I feel like that's just so reductionistic, and that anyone who takes a deep breath and is very logical and reasonable about the situation and is able to incorporate a very broad context of what's happening in the world affecting our youth wouldn't come to such a simplistic conclusion. Because we know that over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's been so much going on. You think, of course, about economic instability. We've had 2 major recessions and a lot of upheaval where parents and families are dealing with unemployment or underemployment. We've also seen health issues over the last 5, 6 years. Now, of course, we point to COVID, but when you're growing up in a household as a child or a teenager, and you're seeing your parents get sick or your grandparents get sick, and you're facing major illnesses as well as death, that's going to affect you. Additionally, we're in an environment of extreme political polarization, and that causes almost everyone to be on tilt, digging in their heels about certain viewpoints and not really being gracious or patient with other people and their perspectives and opinions. And it's unfortunately fomenting more and more hate and aggression, whether that's verbal violence or whether it's physical violence. And so our youth today, they are sponges and they're seeing all of this. And it does cause them at least a lack of peace, if not significant trauma. And then we think about all the things that you and I had to deal with when we were growing up. And I'll just speak for myself, and maybe, you can jump in. But what did I struggle with? I struggled with acne and body image. Even though I'm a guy and we tend to think that girls are a lot more sensitive to that than guys, I still struggled deeply with it. I still remember lying to my folks about being sick so I could stay home the next day simply because I had a gigantic zit on my forehead and I didn't want to be seen like that.
Yeah. So I grew up a fat kid, so I get it, and I had to make up for it with other things, whether it be personality or using my size athletically in places that I could do so.
Yeah.
It was important and it was there, but it was limited.
Yeah. And that points to this desire that we all have for affirmation, for affection, for attention, for validation. And so as a teenager, you're also trying on different hats and roles to figure out where you can get that, because you so desperately need that on a social and relational level from your peers and now on social media. Additionally, youth back then as well as now, they're struggling incredibly with academic pressures. They still feel that on a daily basis. Plus, their parents might be fighting at night. There could be other issues in the house that they're having to deal with, whether it's abuse or violence, or they're living in a community which is disrupted by so much that's really, really oppositional to a healthy and a thriving sort of adolescence and stage of growing up. So my point simply is that it's very, very complicated for youth back then, and more so now when you throw technology into the mix. And so just pointing to social media as the primary driver of these mental health and well-being issues is just unfair. It's not in line with the research. It's extremely problematic. And it doesn't really move us forward, which is
it's an easy thing to point to, because first of all, it's so enormous. It encompasses so much. Secondly, it's a simple thing that most on the surface will go, okay, I get it. Because we could unpack a bunch of things here that would support that thesis. Like, kids could never escape, okay? If they got bullied in school and they went home, they were safe. Their phone didn't ring. If it did, they could take it off the hook. If other kids were talking about them, there was no way to record it, send it, or post it so everybody else could see. So these pressures and the bullying and the ridicule and however you want to label it, it's 24/7, 365. All right. So there's one little nugget, big nugget actually. And though most of that is true, I'm sure there's more to it. You do, the studying and the research on it to help us unpack it a little bit, but it is an obvious place to point. What do you think about, and if this is going to take us off the center lane, feel free to let me know that. What do you take about, what's your take on rather the short spurts that people ingest of information, and that doing something to the way people think, the way they're tuned, their lack of focus, all of that really creating to this sort of crater of confidence, this crater of attention, this, is there anything to that in your path and your studies?
I believe there is. Let me bracket that for just 1 second, because
Okay.
back to my point related to social media and well-being, which again is just such an important question. What I said earlier is not just simply opinion. I want to point to one meta-analysis involving, I think 46 different studies by my colleague, Chris Ferguson over at Stetson University.
Okay.
And a meta-analysis for your audience simply means that all of these studies have been done in the academic literature, and then you bring them together and you combine the findings in order to get a clearer picture. So what this meta-analysis by Chris Ferguson and his colleagues identified was that the differences in anxiety or depression are only shift by about 1% related to social media use. Let me say that a different way. So social media use only accounts for about 1% in the variance among people as it relates to their anxiety or depression levels. There was another meta-analysis by my colleague over at Stanford, Jeff Hancock and his associates. They looked at over 200 studies. And what they found was that social media use accounted for about 1.6% in the variance in depression amongst all these users. And it's about 225,000 users, and about 1.4% of the difference in anxiety. What's the takeaway? It's minuscule. It's such a minuscule effect that social media might have. And it's also dependent on populations, neighborhood you're raised in,
Yep.
socioeconomic status, a number of other factors. You cannot simply point to social media as the primary cause of these mental health issues. It's
How come we don't hear about more about those studies?
Because, and you brought this up earlier,
Yeah.
like it's so easy to scapegoat social media. Everyone's looking for someone to blame, which, by the way, I understand. I understand on a cognitive level that we're looking for someone to blame. We're looking for something to blame, and it's easy to point to social media. But that's also unfair, and it kind of leads me to that next point of your question. But before I get there, I want to say, okay, so that's the backdrop. We want to look at social media as some sort of demon and vilify it, but unfortunately, that takes all these parents and guardians and causes them to have so much fear about the technology, about what their kids are doing.
Yep.
Fear in your life, and I know fear in my life. What is my default reaction to fear? It is to control. It is to restrict.
Yep.
But what are parents doing? They are very naturally, and perhaps with a lot of forethought, even though they have the best of intentions,
Of course.
they're restricting use. They're trying to control use. They're trying to be incredibly militant about what their kids are and are not able to do. But what's the bottom line? Kids circumvent these restrictions. Kids are still going to get access,
Yep.
and kids are going to develop mentally when it comes to these technological skills, and maybe even their education and academic achievement fall behind if they're deprived of the use of devices as we move deeper and deeper, as we move deeper and deeper, not only to a knowledge economy, but also an information-based economy and society. So
Yeah.
that's why it matters. And then the last thing I'll say, okay, so social media, our phones, they're always in our hand, and they allow us access to a world of information, which does benefit us when it comes to our social needs, our communication needs, our entertainment needs, our academic needs. There are a lot of positives.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, there's so many distractions. And I mentioned Cal Newport previously. One of my favorite books by him is Deep Work. And it talks about how you need to have this capacity to do work that is very cognitively demanding, that requires focus and discipline and creativity and problem solving in order to really make your mark in the world. That's what I try to do. And if I'm constantly being distracted by my phone, then what is the bottom line here? The bottom line is that this is not a tool for me. My phone is not a tool that I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
I am the tool that it's using, and I don't ever want to be a tool.
Yeah. No kidding. But these reps, the work, I go back to discipline, right? And I'm going to buy this book by Cal. It's called Deep Work.
You'll
It
love it.
sounds very interesting because I think, and I'm not scientific, I haven't studied, I'm a very instinctual guy, but I believe in reps.
Yeah.
I think no matter what reps you do, you'll become great at, good or bad. If my reps are 1 and 2 second little snaps, 1 and 2, 30-second videos, watching a movie on television, having my laptop open and checking my Snapchat while I'm doing all of that, the reps I'm doing is narrowing the ability to do the deep work.
Yes.
Okay. So if in fact I'm in a society where I'm doing all of that, my ability to do deep work, I have over time, and I'm leading down an ADD or an ADHD path, right, where so many people are being diagnosed with that. Is there any correlation between those reps and society being sort of raised up in the diagnosis of these attention deficit disorders?
I think that picture in the research is still emerging, and so we
Okay.
need some more longitudinal studies. But
Okay.
anecdotally, I know that even though I love to pride myself in an ability to multitask, the reality is that I'm paying attention to these different sources or objects on a very surface level and, not very meaningfully. Let's talk about music. Recently, I'm trying to learn a riff in a Goo Goo Dolls song, and I'm trying to do it on standard tuning,
Okay.
which is tricky, and on acoustic guitar. And so what is it going to take for me to learn this? I can't have the TV on in the background, and
No.
I can't have my phone constantly dinging if I'm really going to be able to rep this out and learn it, especially for someone like me who doesn't have musical talent, but simply works hard to accomplish certain goals. And sometimes you have to do that. You don't have talent. You can just lock in and work hard to make it happen. Well, it's not going to happen if I'm constantly distracted. And this has nothing to do with what I do professionally, but I see the truth of your argument in every area of my life.
Well, I know that with focus, there's an exponential accelerator to what you can accomplish, to how clearly you can think, to allowing creativity to come to the surface, to process complex topics and maybe even see them from multiple angles. Most recently, I had a very good friend of mine who was doing a 60-minute keynote. And he said to me, "Hey, you have any time?" He goes, "My deck is horrible." He goes, "It's big. It's for 860 people. This is a big gig for me. I'm not comfortable. There's something going on." And I said, "Hey, I'm really busy. But Saturday morning, if you want to get on a Teams call at 7 a.m. my time, I have the entire morning and we'll crush it. We'll go through it."
Love it.
We stopped at about 1:15 p.m.
Wow.
and no breaks. And he said to me, you're a camel. And I said, "Why?" He goes, "We didn't stop. You didn't get up to go to the bathroom. You took no breaks. You marched through this." And I said, "This is the focus that people are missing." I said, over the last 35, 40 years, have developed this ability to stay in a lane and stay focused and see the end and see the goal. My kids don't have that just yet. I'm working with them to continue to help nurture it and help them develop it. If anybody out there is listening, and you can hear from hearing Dr. Samir talk here about his focus and discipline, and I'm sure it's not 10,000 hours, Samir. I'm sure it's 50 plus, maybe even 100,000 in your case. But this ability to really stay in something, stay focused on it, and what you say, become an expert, get deep. This is what's going to, I believe. I think you're right. I think this is what's going to differentiate people, specialization, but not specialization at the ChatGPT level,
Right.
Specialization at a very hardcore level. Let's take it back to these studies. I want to talk more about your work. So you learn this stuff, and you're telling me between 1 and 1.6% shift in depression and things of the like. What else is the research telling you? Where are you headed?
I would say that what we're seeing is that it's the social factors that really seem to make a difference when it comes to well-being and mental health. For example, when youth experience certain interpersonal harms online, whether it's they're exposed to risky behaviors, or they're having to deal with a predator, or they're dealing with harassment or threats, that's what really affects them. And additionally, I would say that there's helpful communities online, there's neutral communities online, and there's hurtful communities online. And so the whole birds of a feather adage, I think it rings true. Who are you hanging out with? Who are you exposing yourself to? That matters. And I think that also ties into what you're allowing to come through your feeds. I feel like so many students, so many youth and young people, they don't really think very carefully about who they've added as a friend or a follower, and then what type of content they're constantly exposing themselves to. Because what we take in through our mind, I personally believe it enters our heart and it changes us. Yeah. And so, for example, if I am following an athlete or I'm following a celebrity simply because they're super popular and all my peers are doing the same thing, but then when I see their posts as I scroll through my newsfeed and it makes me feel crappy about myself, do I take the time to unfollow that person? Most students would say no.
No, they don't.
It's affecting them, and so they should. There's so much where they need to ask that question: does this serve me? Does this help me? Or does this hurt me? And then clearly set up boundaries in order to constrain what gets the right to affect them and influence them and inspire them, and what does not get that right.
Well, a couple of sayings come to mind. One is, you're the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. So be selective on who you spend your time with. The other one is your happiness can be directly correlated to the last 10 circumstances you put yourself in or you find yourself in your life. And you think about that logically, all of that, just it checks boxes and makes sense. Certainly the former, you're the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. If you're around negative people that are, Debbie Downing you all the time, no offense, Debbie, if you're out there, but you understand the phrase, you're gonna get dragged down. And sometimes those people are attracted to you because you're positive, and they're looking for that hand up and don't even realize when they get it that they're tugging down because somehow they feel in that. But in limiting, and this is the challenge, in limiting these communities, don't you also limit perspective? Like what's the fine line, and where do you see the line between putting yourself in this little box of your own reality? Because this could work negatively as well. Hey, I hate that guy, Vic. He's always so freaking positive. I want to stick my finger down my throat. Click, unclick that dude, right? I might only be saying nice, helpful, looking for my 1, my 2, my number 3 person that I can help and impact. What's the line there, Samir? How do you work that?
Such a great question. I think that we want our youth to grow in agency and autonomy to control their online experience and to sort of keep harmful messages and content and people from their lives. But as you were saying, we also want to make sure that they are exposed to a breadth of viewpoints, because that could help them moving forward personally and professionally. And what I would say is that youth need to make sure that at the same time that they're trying to set up this social network to serve them, that they refrain from deriving self-worth and identity out of what other people are saying or thinking or doing. And I just feel like so many youth are so susceptible to basing their worth on what they see around them in terms of what their friends are posting about, or who's got a new car, or who hung out with who at the latest party, etc. And that is a situation where you're never going to win if you're constantly comparing with each other. And I know that social media sets us up for that constant comparison, but you mentioned self-control and self-discipline. You've got to figure out what it will take for you to not be so desperate for everyone to like you and to love you, and to figure out how you can derive identity out of, for example, who you're becoming and what you can control, for example. What you said makes me think about this meme I saw a while ago, and it was a simple diagram. It was 2 circles interconnected. One circle was things that matter, and one circle was things that you can control, and the overlap was where you should focus your attention and your time and your energies. Otherwise, who cares? I mean, there's so much that we think that we have control over. For example, what people are saying about us or thinking about us, and we don't at all. Plus, you could be incredibly popular one day, and then the next day, everyone hates you. So why even play that game? Figure out what your gifts are, measure in those gifts. Yeah, you will struggle. Yeah, you'll get knocked down, but at least you're staying true to yourself as you move along this trajectory towards becoming the best version of yourself.
The issue with the attention economy is there's money in it.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous amounts of money. You have children making millions of dollars a month, where that was utterly impossible not a very long time ago. I saw a video last night come into one of my feeds about this kid who played the most unbelievable Guitar Hero game that I've ever seen in my life. And I said two things to myself. I said, first of all, I think he said something about playing that actual game 50,000 times. Might have been in the tag. And he was two-hand tapping, and the things were coming at like Mach 1, and he got a perfect score. And it was long. It was minutes long. And when it was done, like you could see his eyes flickering and the brain was going. And, he's two-handing, and it's like there's only 4 buttons on the freaking Guitar Hero guitar. And he's got great control and dexterity, and the right hand's going. And I'm like, I bet you that kid can't play a G chord on a real instrument.
Sure.
Or imagine if those 50,000 hours, he'd be Segovia.
Yeah.
If he'd be a virtuoso on an instrument, and he gets up and he freaks out and he goes ballistic, and he's got, I don't know, 100 million views on this video. And if you back into the math, there's a lot of money that's come from it. I'm sure it's not his only video. And he goes absolutely ape shit, and he's losing his mind that he did it, perfect score popping up. I mean, there's money in that. You could monetize that. You could rent a private plane on a runway for $500-$600 an hour just to go in it and shoot social media. Hey, I'm here. I'm on my PJ. I'm heading somewhere, right? All your friends in there, and they're sipping champagne, right? They don't know the thing never took off. Matter of fact, that plane doesn't even fly anymore. It's a shell of a plane that's sitting some tarmac or some lot somewhere, and you go on there and it's well lit. They reupholstered the inside because it was cheap, and there's money here. It's been monetized. It's such a people will have said money's the root of all evil. It's certainly a great contributor. We need it to exist in society. We have to bring some value to society to earn it to continue to operate in society. But when these platforms and the attention economy is created such a monetization, how do you combat that? How do you combat wanting to be popular, wanting to monetize your channel, whether it be Mr. Beast, who makes 6, 7, 8 million a month, with his obscene, crazy videos, and he does crazy stuff, and some of it's good, clean fun, some of it's nuts. But what are we up against here?
Yeah, when I go in and speak to public and private schools, there's a fun activity that I do with the students in the audience, which simply involves anonymous flash polling, where they take their phone and they just respond to these polls that I put up on the screen. And then it aggregates all the results, and then, in a live fashion, just, populates what the findings are. One of the questions I ask the students is, how many of you want to be an influencer? And of course, the numbers are incredibly skewed in one direction. And the reality, though, is that becoming an influencer and succeeding is the exception by far and not the norm. Right. And of course, you and I, we don't want to dunk on influencers, because you can grow in various skills such as entrepreneurship and business and marketing, and all those have great value. But we also want, when I speak to youth, I try to convey to them that they understand the full picture, that yes, you could make a lot of money. However, when you talk to influencers and you hear their stories, they convey to you how difficult their lives actually are, in terms of having to, for example, live stream for 10 to 12 hours a day, having to always think of unique ideas for content. Otherwise, they won't be featured on the main page, and then their numbers will slip. It is a constant grind, and it is not as glamorous as it seems to be. And additionally, it's only going to be a fraction of a percent who actually make it to the topmost level when it comes to being a celebrity influencer. And so I just want youth to have a clear perspective about what is entailed here. And I, again, want them to come back to their gifts. I want them to come back to what they want to throw themselves into as work, because you and I, we derive a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction because we have thrown ourselves into our work and over time have become subject matter experts. And that's what I think truly allows you to have something to get out of bed for in the morning. It can't be money, can't be fame.
No.
It's got to be the satisfaction you derive from your work.
I have a friend and colleague who just sold his business for a very large sum of money, very large, retired, miserable.
I hear that so often.
Was so busy in his work, and it was his persona and his life. And now that you think he got to the top of the mountain and has the retirement home of many dreams and the life and the investments and sort of the freedom to get up and do whatever they want, this person is not happy yet. And he's cognizant of it. He's a work in progress. He's trying to get there. But first of all, for the record, the reason I do this podcast is to learn. I have a lifelong thirst for knowledge. And as I tell people now, I've just released my 52nd episode. And they said, what'd you get out of it? I said, I am 52 episodes smarter than I was this time last year.
There you
go.
And
I just hope that I pick up a nugget from something along the way. I love meeting people, love talking to people. And so, it's interesting to talk about these topics while we're doing this, because we're doing this for a purpose. We'd like people to hear our message. I know we're going to get to a spot where we talk about, what you're doing and maybe how people could help support it. But, I don't think I'm going to be Joe Rogan by any stretch of the means. And, but if Jeff Bezos is watching, Samir needs a donation. See, he needs an endowment for some of his research because he's doing good work. We'll get that out of the way. But I want to go back again. So we talked about the 1 to 6%. I want to find something. We talked about the sort of socioeconomic circumstances and other things. What is the one thing about people being on connected devices, being online, having access to all these different apps? What is it, the one thing that really, gets you hyper alerted? Like, what is the thing you're focused on as like a real something to watch?
So I do want to reiterate that it's only about 1 to 1.6% of the variance or difference in individual levels of depression, anxiety, all of these concerns that so many individuals have that seem to be based on social media.
Did I say 1 to 6? I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's
say
right.
It's 1 to 1.6, right? Very small.
Very, very, very tiny.
Okay.
So thinking about technology and what is coming along that I think might be concerning, I've been hearing more incidents involving deepfakes, and this may not be something new at all to many of your audience members, because we remember this happening to Taylor Swift, not around the time of this year's Super Bowl, but last year's Super Bowl, 2024, about February. It hit the news that a number of fabricated images of Taylor Swift in the nude were circulating on social media, and so I just see that happening, unfortunately, at schools involving middle schoolers, involving high schoolers. And so
oh my gosh,
it's really concerning when you're thinking about the fact that the technology to create these images is so readily available online that youth are willing to go ahead and do this and target appear in that manner is also, it's very, very concerning. And then when you think about the traumatic outcomes that result when these images get released and people wonder if, they assume that they're real, wonder the type of life that the target lives. It damages their reputation. It's then out there forever, possibly, depending on how many platforms it's gone across. And so I'm worried about that. And I want more and more focus on in schools, on digital citizenship, on media literacy, on using technology wisely. But the way that it's being done, unfortunately, tends to be preaching and lecturing and criticizing. And when we do that in the same breath as a discussion with social media, I feel like our youth just put up walls and they think that we're out of touch, and we can't possibly help them if we don't understand how much of a benefit it is in their lives. And all we want to do is restrict and control.
You mean to tell me the videos of Donald Trump playing guitar with Elon Musk aren't real?
Actually, I haven't seen those.
Yeah, there's some funny stuff out there. Trump is, playing blues guitar and Musk is playing something. I mean, clearly AI generated, but
understood.
the deep fakes, gosh, as I really, drift off and think about that, we already have a struggle knowing what's real and what's headline. Because and I hate to say this, it goes back to money. There's more money in being first than being right. There's more money in sensationalism than there is in reality. I've seen so many headlines say one thing, which are clearly obvious to clickbait somebody. When you actually invest the time to read the article, you realize it's not the headline. Most people don't get beyond the headline. And so I still have friends that will say to me, hey, did you hear about X or Y? And I said, no, I didn't. Oh, yeah, let me send you the article. And they send me the article and I read the headline. And I go, yep, I would think the same thing too. Hey, let's look at it. And then you get in, and this is probably 50 to 60% of the time. You get into the article, you unpack it, and you go, hey, did you read this? No, I just saw the headline. And I'm like, dude, you're older than me. Come on, you didn't read the headline. You didn't go beyond the headline. Like, invest the other 30 seconds. It's not a lot here. But, and the content gets shorter and shorter, and it's very easy to manipulate. Even if it's not a fake, it's a snip. So I think we have to really train people to take that next step, to ask that next question, to do a little bit of work. Not a lot. Doesn't take a lot. The old saying, the extra mile is often a millimeter, right? Do that little bit of work to validate what you're seeing. Again, I still have friends that send me snips all day long. I spend so much time. I'm like their Snopes. I'm like, I take the time to read and then find it on another source or third source and see if I can triangulate on something that appears to be reality, because it's so easy to get duped. So is education and really educating parents to train kids. Do we see any of this coming in the curriculum in schools? Is this something that you think there needs to be a focus on? How do we combat that?
Yeah, this is part of my work, and it truly depends on resources many times at the school level.
Okay.
All educators recognize the importance of teaching these skills, but it's just whether we have time as it relates to our lesson plans. And what I would say that is encouraging to me is that when you think about some platforms like TikTok, you see a lot of youth who no longer shrug off ignorance. They want to be in the know about social justice issues and current events, and they're speaking out, and they're educating their peers, and they're educating a ton of adults. And my hope is that adults eventually will get to the point where it's not in vogue to be ignorant anymore and just shrug it off. They will want to sort of rise up and understand things more fully. And I'm hoping the pendulum swings like it has for youth, where, again, youth don't want to be ignorant. It's not cool to be ignorant.
Is it something you're seeing?
It is something I'm seeing.
Really?
These individuals who are younger these days, they're going to grow up soon enough to be in adulthood. And ideally, they will raise children where they take pride in not being ignorant, but instead being in the know, understanding that there's multiple angles for any story. And just like you said, taking the time to be thorough instead of so quick.
Well, that's encouraging, because that wasn't my perspective. And it could be based upon some of the things I see, some of the things, like I've got kids that range from 22 to 29. So I see a lot of their friends. I participate in, some of the conversations that go on with and around them. And honestly, some of them are wicked smart and have really beyond their years and have developed in quite an impressive manner, and others, not so much. So I didn't know the state of state, and you being an educator, you have a better lens into sort of what's going on. And it's encouraging to hear that they want to know, it's important. You have to know. I mean, the day my thirst for truth and information ceases, hopefully will be the last, sip of air that I take, because it's just something that fuels me. I love it. But I don't know where that came from, honestly. I just love smart people and good information. I like funny people too. So, it's not just one way. But so you see that trend coming.
I do. It's still a minority of youth, but I definitely see a trend as I work with thousands of students, and, again, whether it's in the community or speaking at their school and having focus groups and informal chats, I do see that there's more and more of a desire to be in the know. And I mean, you and I could speculate as the reasons for that. Maybe
Yeah.
they feel like, that adults are trying to fool them or pull the rug out from under them, or, whatever the expression is. Maybe they feel like they don't want to be caught with their proverbial pants down. They want to know what they're talking about. But I'm hoping, again, that just continues to snowball, and you eventually see a critical mass of students carrying the torch, for knowledge and for love for learning, and just, being well-rounded in so many areas, instead of, again, this ignorance that they tend to just sort of laugh off.
Well, the world is run by older generations mostly.
For now.
Certainly for now. And technology and the tools that we have available to us have accelerated learning, knowledge, the ability to learn, the ability to transform at such a rapid rate. And I say this with all due respect. Being in your mid to late 80s and being in Congress, you can't possibly have the value you need to be in that position. And I don't want to make this political. I'm mostly I'm apolitical on this show for sure, and I invite all viewpoints for sure, just whatever mine are. But there's such a wide gap between somebody operating in that space and where the 18 to 20 somethings are, who are going to inherit and run the universe as we know it within the next decade or so. That's a tough one. That's a real tough one to challenge, because none of us want to be put out to pasture, but it does require, a continuous learning appetite and a level of participation. I mean, I'm unpacking a topic here that we can go down a rabbit hole on, but the point is that it's encouraging to see that from your perspective, albeit a minority, per your feedback, that the youth are becoming more interested in finding out what's really going on. And it's disheartening. I mean, there's just the governmental bureaucracies all over the world, not just in America, have, back to my earlier point, they've gotten so big and so unmanageable and so wiry that you don't know what the heck to believe anymore. You really don't. It's tough. It's tough to get to the truth.
Another related point that comes to mind is a trend where more and more social media platforms, gaming companies, schools, nonprofits, they're trying to build a youth-centric approach where they go ahead and they want to listen to the teenagers. They want to hear what they have to say. They want to validate their voice. They want them to continue to speak up and provide guidance and input and insights related to product engineering, related to educational initiatives, related to this new campaign, which may or may not work. Is it going to be thought of as lame amongst adolescents, or is it going to really resonate and make a difference? And so I truly love to see that as well, because youth have a lot to offer. Youth are, in fact, experts at what it means to be a young person these days. So
you think?
We should have that expertise as we're building all these products. And so thankfully, again, we're seeing more and more of a movement in that direction. And their voice is so very important.
Samir, tell us about, with specificity, what you're currently working on from a studies perspective, what you hope to achieve, how that work gets funded, and how anybody within the reach of this podcast can help.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I focus on emerging technologies amongst youth, and we're looking to not only measurably prevent harassment and cyberbullying and dating violence online and sextortion, all of these harms that I discussed earlier, where again, we identify a specific percentage goal, a decrease that we want to see, and then we figure out what it'll take in terms of interventions, when it's education, when it comes to policy, when it comes to technology. What can we do in order to get those numbers of victimization down? But not only that, we also focus on the positives. Very honestly, Vic, I think you can sense this, but I am pro-technology.
Yeah.
Technology is here to stay. Social media is here to stay. And so how can we come alongside our youth and support them to participate in healthy online communities, to act online in ways that really serve them and set them up for success when it comes to who they want to be, when it comes to certain hobbies and skill sets they want to develop. And so it's all about promoting civility, promoting citizenship online, and countering, of course, toxicity. So there's a number of things that I'm currently studying. For example, I'm interested in the use of counter speech to deal with harassment. And right now, you perhaps heard the expression, we have a lot of bystanders who don't really do anything when they see something mean or cruel or hurtful going on online. And instead, what we'd like for them to do is become upstanders. So don't be a bystander, be an upstander. But those are just words to a teenager. What does that actually mean? Well, I believe that by teaching counterspeech techniques, where we specifically equip them with phrases and verbiage and language to use to diffuse conflict that's evolving online or unfolding online, to deflect and distract and change the topic, to introduce humor or a meme in order to get the individuals to talk about something else.
Break the ice.
So there's specific strategies, maybe even cultivate empathy. There's a number of things that can be done through little nuggets, phrases, sentences. Counterspeech techniques are what they're called.
Can we unpack that a little bit? Because
Absolutely.
I'm really interested in that. Give me an example.
Sure. Well, there was this one research project done, because I know you love data, and I know you love
data.
science.
Yeah.
There was a research project done involving about 1,400 social media users who were engaging in racist statements and xenophobic comments towards others. And so they took these 1,400 individuals and they put them in 3 different buckets. Those would be the interventions. One intervention was having others remind them of the consequences. You don't want to say that because I'm going to take a screenshot and I'm going to send this to your boss, or I'm going to send this to your principal and you're going to get expelled. So the first bucket was reminding them of consequences, legal, reputational, etc. The second bucket was, let's just try to use humor to change the topic, to get them to laugh, to sort of, reduce the tension in the specific situation.
Pattern interrupt.
Right. Exactly. You see, when we're seeing people being hateful towards each other. That was the second bucket. And the third bucket was, let's go ahead and try empathetic statements or responses to get them to put themselves in the shoe of another person and to be thinking about how this might affect them if they were sensitive in the same sorts of ways. So, for example, an empathetic statement would be, I can't believe you said that. What if someone targeted you based on the shape of your nose, or based on the texture of your hair, or the color of your skin, whatever it would be? Or how would you feel if, people who deeply, deeply looked up to you saw that you were writing these sorts of things, just to try to cultivate empathy. And of those 3 buckets, what they found was that the most powerful intervention was empathetic statements. It actually decreased racism and hate speech by 1/3, which is pretty significant.
Yeah.
So that's just one form of counterspeech. And to be sure, humor sometimes works, and reminding others of consequences of their hateful actions works as well.
I just think you need all 3 skills, honestly.
Absolutely.
Because you're dealing with human beings and everybody reacts to different things.
And what's also interesting is that, let's say I go into a school with you and we just pull aside some students in the hallway and we say, all right, here's a situation, where you're being targeted and everyone's making fun of you because of the clothes that you wear or the type of car your mom drives. Do you know what you do in this situation? Their straightaway response is always, for sure. I'd go talk to an adult, or I would block them. But actually, when the situation of harassment or abuse or mistreatment actually occurs to them, they freeze and they get stuck and they don't actually know what to do because they've never worked through an action plan. And so when you're able to, for example, teach them counterspeech techniques, then they have an action plan about what phrasing to use, how to deflect, how to diffuse, how to go ahead and reduce tension, how to make people laugh in that situation. And in those specific ways, they are then upstanders because they're reducing, or at least attenuating some of the harassment, instead of contributing to it through their silence, passively endorsing it or condoning it.
Samir, I'm gonna give you some Brooklyn wisdom right now.
Love it.
And you're gonna turn it into scientific know-how, or you're gonna tell me where it came from scientifically.
Okay.
I'm a guy who grew up in New York, grew up, in the sort of city environment. And you learn a lot of things, and times were different back then. And one of the things, and this even went on, you might say to yourself when I'm done here, what kind of friends does Vic have? But, I grew up and still to this day have a really tight-knit group of friends. Some I've been friends with for over 40 years.
Wow.
And chop busting, as we might nicely call it, is something that you poke fun. It's a guy thing. We don't do it to women, and we don't do it to strangers on the street, And what we have found out is that if you're in that clique and you expose your weakness, it will be exploited. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so the countermeasure for that is self-deprecation.
Yes.
And so I have constantly used self-deprecation unknowingly, but it became a tool early on that I used because if somebody would say to me, hey, you think maybe you should get a bigger shirt? You look kind of fat. And I'm like, no, I'm auditioning for the Michelin, the Michelin Man. Like, you'd have to whip out something and own it so much further. So rather than be hurt that he called me fat, I would dive into a place of absurdity that they could, and all of a sudden disarmed.
Yes.
You disarm somebody. So self-deprecation for me became one of those tools. It works. I see, even to this day, there are so many sensitive people around what they perceive to be their sensitive spot or their weakness. And I constantly look at that and I go, if they just kind of poke fun at it a little bit, a big crooked nose, a bald spot in the back of the head, maybe there's a mole growing on the side of their cheek, I have so many witty things to say about all of those things that the weapons of mass destruction that the attacker has would be gone. That's definitely one thing. So I would suggest people try it. And especially if you're ever hanging out with me and my friends and somebody keys in on something, just attack yourself 10 times worse and let it go. Be lighthearted about it. Nobody hates you. What's the science behind that? What's the studies say about self-deprecation?
Yeah, this is another thing that I study.
Okay.
I mentioned counter speech. I study empathy. I study self-control. But what you're talking about is resilience. And it's simply the capacity to bounce back from adversity. In this case, it's social adversity because through banter or through insults or through a little bit of cruelty, someone's picking on you.
Yeah.
But if we wilt, then obviously they win.
Yeah.
And we don't really want them to win. So there it ties into identity. Can we make sure that we don't allow it to phase us as much as they want it to? And then secondly, it's related to developing those skills. How can you be resilient when you're being targeted in mild ways and moderate ways, and sometimes even in severe ways? Because typically it's not physical aggression. I would never advocate for resilience in situations where you're being shoved into a locker or where you're being beat up.
Of course.
I'd advocate for resilience when it's again verbal, when it's posted online. And unfortunately, what we've seen in society, and this, by the way, is understandable, we tend to have a lot of adults who just like to swoop in and rescue their kids when they're dealing with a little bit of banter, a little bit of insults. And I'm not trying to dismiss the fact that some kids are absolutely more sensitive than other kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm simply saying that we need to ask ourselves the hard question: are we ill preparing them for adulthood?
Correct.
Where without a doubt, they are going to deal with social and relational conflict in the workforce, with their in-laws, with so many other individuals, because it's part and parcel of life. And so part of my research involves, number one, identifying the role of resilience, and then also figuring out how we can equip parents and schools to help their kids, help students grow in resilience.
When I mentioned having to have all the tools, so I talked about self-deprecation being one of my tools, but it's also sometimes you're in situations where they seem like you have to be able to discern which tool to use in milliseconds.
Yes.
And that is, I think it's a trainable skill. I think the first thing you have to do is be in tune and aware and know how to deploy the things, much like if you're a fighter. You can't get in and throw certain combinations if you don't do it in the ring practicing, right, and sparring. Because when the fight comes, you don't know how to do it. So education, awareness, training, like teaching people these tools. But, you reminded me of a story that happened to me, oh gosh, it's probably 15 plus, maybe 17 years ago. We were in New Jersey visiting family. It was the holiday time. It was snowing out. And we were at my wife's aunt's house. And the kids went outside to play in the snow. They hadn't seen snow. They're there with all their cousins. And I walk out. We're getting ready to leave, and I walk out. And as I walk out, there's a bit of a confrontation going on amongst my wife's cousin and some random guy in a car who happens to drive by. And this guy is spitting nails. He is so hot and so mad. and he's being really disrespectful to my wife's woman. And I go down there. I'm like, hey. And I said, my wife's cousin, I say, hey, just go back to the house. So I said, hey, sir, what's happening here? Can I help you? I said, Merry Christmas to you. How can I help you? And he goes, those kids, they threw a snowball at my car while I was driving down the road. Keep those kids on a leash. And immediately I recognized that this snowball was just the icing on the cake.
Gotcha. Right?
This wasn't about the snowball. There was something brewing underneath. And I said to him, hey, sir, I apologize. I said, the kids are out here being kids. We certainly didn't tell them to come out here and start throwing snowballs at cars passing by. Can we check your car? Is there any damage to the car? If there is, I'd like to figure it out. We'll figure out how to take care of it. I said, we'll make sure the kids aren't doing this. And he did not want to let go. He did not want to let go. There was something going on, and he's escalating. Okay. Well, at that time, my kids are coming down the driveway, and they're watching me. And now the guy is being abusive to me. And he's saying a lot of really crappy stuff. And I said, sir, I've apologized. I've offered to make it right. It's Christmas. I said, thank God nobody's hurt. Everything's fine. I said, I think maybe if there's no other thing, we should just part ways and accept our apology and let's move on. Well, he starts opening the car door to get out of the car. He's now like, I've diffused him so much.
Wow.
Like now, because he's the calmer and nicer I get, he sees me as prey.
I see.
And all of a sudden the driver's door opens up and this woman gets out and she starts coming around the back of the car. I'm thinking now it's 2-on-1. She is verbally attacking this guy. It's her husband. And she is like, aren't you listening to him? He's apologized. He offered to, what is wrong with you? I mean, now she is, and he gets even madder because now she's on my side. Right. And so finally I said, sir, before this goes to a place that nobody wants, let's just wind this down. He gets back in the car and I'm just keeping my eye on him. And he goes, go ahead, say something to me. I didn't say a word. He goes, I didn't think so. And he pulls away. Samir, we get in the car. And my daughter, who at the time is 12, she's my oldest, said to me, why did you let him talk to you like that? I mean, I can't believe you let him talk to you like that. And I said, hey, honey, at some point you're going to recognize what tools you need to deploy at what time in life. I said, what was I going to do? Fight the guy? For what? A snowball? I said, and if I did, maybe I hurt him and he goes to the hospital and now I'm in court and things go on. God forbid, maybe something even worse happens. On the other side, what if he hurts me? Yeah. I got to go to work next week. I got the week off for the holidays. I'm responsible for all of you. Yeah. I said, and someday you'll learn that maybe your dad's a little bit smarter than you might think right now, because the easy thing to do. So again, I go back to, you have to have so many tools. I just hoped at that moment, and when we left, my wife and I talked about that for a bit. And I said, that was the most unintentional lesson I hope sticks with all of our kids. I hope they recall this as we go on, because that required the ability to stay in it, every bit of training and, from working with irate people, customers and corporate America and all these things. Sure. But we need all of these tools, Samir. People need all of these tools. Tell me more about your research. I want to give you all the last words here tonight. I want to know about what you're doing, how you're raising money to do it, who you hope to attract, and how we can help.
Sure, I appreciate that. I'm looking to partner with philanthropic-minded individuals, whether they're part of a foundation, a family foundation, or an organization, whether they're part of a corporation that's just doing various sorts of social responsibility type of activities. I'm looking to get funding for my work. I'm looking to get an endowment for my work at my university, simply so that I can continue it. Research takes a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of people. And so that would support my work, support a lab, that is able to do this incredibly important work, not just for today or tomorrow, but for decades and decades to come. And so I just invite anyone who's interested to reach out to me, and we can have that conversation and be able to demonstrate that, look, this is going to make a measurable difference in the lives of youth. And God knows we need it. I mean, this is the time. This is the inflection point.
Well, I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank you on two levels. First, I want to thank you for coming on today and sharing your research, your insights, and the work that you're doing. But most importantly, I want to thank you for what you are doing and the work you've dedicated yourself and your life to, and to anybody who's working with you, your team. I think we are at an inflection point, Samir. I think we've gotten as far as we've gotten to, and somehow I think we've been lucky. Now, the person who has, had unfortunate circumstances, or a family member who suffered unfortunate circumstances as a result of something connected to this is going to listen to this and go, hey, not all of us are lucky. And I get it. But I think we're at an inflection point where this thing has the ability to go completely wrong, or to get, readjusted back on the rails and be the tools that you and I both believe they are, that can be used for community, for good, and for all the things we know that can be. So thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic. Yeah, both of us are compelled to action, in our certain lanes, and we're driven to make that difference. And so we'll keep at it. We'll keep fighting the good fight together.
Sounds great. Have a good evening.
You as well.
Bye. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.